Welcome to our Together on Mission podcast, brought to you by the Baptist Union of Victoria and hosted by our Director of Mission and Ministries, Reverend Daniel Bullock. Daniel will be joined by a guest from our Victorian Baptist family each week for a brief discussion that aims to encourage you in your personal walk of faith and give you some practical suggestions that you can implement through your week. Throughout this year, the podcast will be focusing on the theme of being and sharing the good news. For the first 5 episodes, Daniel will be joined by Reverend Darrell Jackson, Acting Principal of Whitley Theological College, as they look together at the theme, being and sharing the good news, and how it relates to hope. Darrell is an Associate Professor, an astute theologian, missiologist, pastor, husband, father, and all-round good guy. And now, let's hear from Daniel and Darrell.
Today I want to talk about some assets we have to give us the confidence to be able to share the good news and bring hope to our communities. I have no doubt the programs we run in our church can form part of the work of bringing hope to our communities. Therefore, I think it's always important to be auditing our programs and our physical assets and ask, are they being used to serve our mission? Are they bearing fruit? However, in addition to our property and our program assets, there are other assets that each of us have at our fingertips that I think are the keys to sharing the good news and providing hope to our communities. And they are what I would call our spiritual assets. Our spiritual assets are the tools given to us by God to impact this world. They are very much like the fruit of the Spirit. Spiritual assets refer to the qualities that enable us to do what is right and good for ourselves and for others. A few weeks ago in episode 1, we looked at the passage in Luke chapter 4, which you would know well, when Jesus unrolled the scroll in the synagogue and said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Just as Jesus' mission sprung from these words he read, our assets are the actions that manifest from our words and our convictions. They are our faith in action, the Spirit at work through us in the world. Spiritual assets that are particularly important to being and sharing good news and bringing hope to our communities include being generous towards others, being generous with our words, deeds, and through our resources, showing compassion, caring for those in our street who may or may not have others to care for them, offering forgiveness and seeking reconciliation, which lifts the burden of guilt from people, providing appreciation and gratitude, offering a friendly word, a smile, even praising others, sharing hospitality and inclusion to neighbours, even strangers who are in need, advocating for justice, speaking out and not remaining silent when a community member's rights have been violated, providing patience and humility, which could include sharing credit and elevating others, showing tolerance and acceptance. These are the spiritual assets that spread good news and provide hope in our community. Friends, right now, our world needs hope. Our world needs good news. And we not only have the message of hope, but we have the capacity, the power, the spiritual assets to meet that need and spread hope. Darrell, you're a missiologist. Can you help us to reflect a little on having the confidence to use the spiritual assets we have in our personal context and our daily life?
Well, thanks, Daniel, for drawing attention to the fact that I am a missiologist. Simple terms, that means I study Christian mission. But one of the passages that I constantly keep coming back to, and this won't at all be a surprise to many listeners, is the passage in Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20, that speak about that occasion when Jesus gives final instructions to his disciples. If Luke 4 is an early point at which he makes it very clear what his ministry is about, then Matthew 28 is making it very clear what the ministry of his disciples is to be about. And it basically distills down to these things. That he says to them, wherever you are, make disciples. Wherever you are, make disciples. And making disciples is the core of this command. He says, wherever you are, make disciples, and then follows it fairly quickly on with teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. Now, how many commandments did Jesus give? Well, as far as we know, just 2. And they are love God and love your neighbour. Now, it seems to me that these assets, spiritual assets, as you've described them here, Daniel, could also be described as qualities of discipleship. So this is Jesus essentially saying to his disciples, be like this list, really key to what it means to be a disciple, and teach others to obey these things too, because that's what it means to love God and, secondly, love your neighbour. They're about who we are as much as what we do. And let me just quickly look at some of those things on that list. Some of these require more confidence than others. Advocating for justice, tolerance and acceptance, hospitality and inclusion. Those can be controversial for some of us. But even those that seem less controversial, forgiveness, compassion, generosity, patience, humility, whilst those may seem to be easier, they require a lot of hard work. They still require working at. And that's why Jesus says, you are going to do this as disciples, because the call to follow Jesus is a call to community. It's a call to be part of a community of disciples. And that's where Sunday, week by week, worship in companion with other disciples of Jesus is key to enabling us to better model and learn how to model these spiritual assets, that when we actually are wherever we are, we can then share those with others, and in the process begin the process of making disciples.
Thanks, Darrell. I think you've picked up on the pivotal point of to follow Jesus is to be a disciple of Jesus, and we need to live out our discipleship. And so with that in mind, I was wondering if you've actually seen people live out their discipleship journey in a practical way and in an effective way. Have you got any examples of that?
Yeah. Well, I guess having been around a bit, you see many of these kind of examples. But one that lives with me as a personal experience is one that my wife Beth and I, around about 20 years ago, when we were working in Budapest in Hungary, at that point we were worshipping with a small congregation of the Church of Scotland. And over 100 years or so, it had had a consistent ministry to migrants and to refugees. And Sunday by Sunday, as we attended worship, we would be joined by around about 20 or so refugees from a detainment camp just outside the city. And they would join us for worship. They came from backgrounds in places like Iran, Iraq, Pakistan. Many were followers of Jesus, some not yet, and some would still identify as Muslim. It was fascinating to worship Sunday by Sunday in that way. Following the Sunday worship, we would immediately move into a lunch together, which initially we, as a church congregation, provided for the refugees. But we realized over time that one of the things that makes us human is the ability to offer hospitality, and that's embedded here in this list of assets. And we realized that allowing them to become the host was an important step. And so over the course of the following months, they began to become those who served and provided lunch for us. And it was a wonderful way of giving them dignity and purpose. But as I reflect on those meals and from the distance of history now over the years looking back, I imagine around the table 20 or 30 people, some church members, some of them refugees, together discussing stories of life and faith and hope and purpose. And in the Bible studies that often follow those lunches, together discovering more about the God who is known in Jesus. And those meal times for me still stand as probably one of the closest foretastes of the kingdom of heaven that I've ever experienced, that take me right back to that place of generosity, of compassion, of humility, of engagement with the other. They're remarkable memories for me.
Thank you so much for that practical example there, Darrell. I very much appreciate your input into this podcast, but really for your input into the last 5 podcasts. It's been great input, and I'm sure it's been beneficial to those who've been listening. Looking forward to catching up with you another time and having you back to share in this podcast in the months ahead. And until next week, may you experience the blessings of God.